Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be discussing all about Japanese encephalitis. So, our objective for today is to define Japanese encephalitis, its pathophysiology, epidemiology, symptoms, risk factors, prevention and treatment, and government programs. So, let's define Japanese encephalitis. Japanese encephalitis is a flavivirus, a viral disease characterized by the inflammation of the brain. It is transmitted by Culex rhinoceros, a night-biting mosquito, which is common in rural and agricultural areas, often associated with rice farming. So if you're wondering why is it called Japanese encephalitis, in 1871 it is described in Japan. For the epidemiology, JEV is the main cause of viral encephalitis in many countries of Asia, with an estimated 68,000 clinical cases every year. Although symptomatic Japanese encephalitis, or JE, is rare, the case fatality rate among those with encephalitis can be as high as 30%. Permanent neurologic and psychiatric sequelae can occur in 30% to 50% of those with encephalitis. 24 countries in the WHO Southeast Asia and Western Pacific regions have endemic JEV transmission, exposing more than 3 billion people to risk of infection. Annual incidence of clinical disease varies both across and within endemic countries, ranging from 1 to 10 per 100,000 population or higher during outbreaks. A literature review estimates nearly 68,000 clinical cases of JE globally each year, with approximately 13,600 to 20,400 deaths. JE primarily affects children. Most adults in endemic countries have natural immunity after childhood infection, but individuals in any age may be affected. So this is the picture of areas where JEV already affected areas of JEV. So the red ones are the risk area, while the gray ones are no known risk for JEV. As you can see, it's most Asian countries. Next, for the demographic data for the Philippines. So this is the record. Ages between under 5, last 2018 has 8 cases and 2017 has 14 cases. And in ages 5 to 9 years old, it has 10 cases in 2018 and 11 cases in 2017. So, as you can see, it is lesser compared to 2018. Next is the diagram. So this is just the diagram so that we can see the difference between year 2018 and year 2017. And this is the diagram region where JEV cases came from. So it's from, more of it is coming from region 3 and region 6, region 3 and 2, and lesser to the other regions. For the pathophysiology, so first is the attachment of Japanese encephalitis virus to a host cell membrane. Local membrane disruption may lead to entry of the virus into the cell itself. The virus initially propagates at the site of the bite and regionally lymph nodes. Two cellular characteristics are critical to the pathogenesis. So this is the two cellular characteristic that critical to the pathogenesis is the M protein which help to anchor virus onto the host cell, and the E protein, which is primary or principal immunologic feature and which express on the membrane of infected cells. Then, the E protein mediates membrane fusion of the viral envelope and cellular membrane, promoting viral entry into the host. The Japanese encephalitis virus replication cycle includes initial host-receptor interaction of the virus, followed by receptor-mediated receptor interaction virus by receptor-mediated endocytosis, fusion of the viral and host cell membranes, subsequent cytoplasmic release of viral genome, and several other transcription and pre-translation steps. Maturation of virus particles occurs in the Golgi complex, followed by ultimate release of the virus. So that's what happened in releasing the virus in our body. So for the transmission, JEV virus is transmitted to humans through the bite of infected Culex species, particularly the Culex tritinor orangeus. The virus is maintained in a cycle between mosquitoes and vertebrate hosts, primarily pigs, wading birds. JE virus transmission occurs primarily in rural agricultural areas, often associated with the rice production and flooding irrigation. In some areas of Asia, these conditions can occur near urban centers. So, we call the human as the dead-end host because they do not usually develop high enough concentration of JEV virus in their bloodstreams. Also, it's most common in farming because that place is where pigs and other animals is naalagaan. So this is the process the process on how JEV virus transmitted. So it first came from the infected mosquito bites a bird and passes on the virus. Then mosquito bites a bird and picks up the virus, and then the infected mosquito bites the animals and passes the JE virus, and the virus multiply inside the body cells. Then mosquito bites infected animal and pick up the JE virus, and then infected mosquito bites humans and non-host animals who are unable to pass on the virus. That's why it called dead-end host. So for the signs and symptoms, primarily, the first symptoms or signs that you will encounter if you have JEV is the fever and severe headache. So, most of the cases of JEV is asymptomatic. If may symptoms ka, usually magkakasakit ka ng 5 to 15 days after exposure to the virus. So, the signs and symptoms is fever, severe headache, vomiting, diarrhea, general weakness. For the neurological symptoms, tremor, seizure, expressionless face, and sudden paralysis. Next is for the risk factors. Long-term travelers, persons involved in outdoor recreational activities, going to endemic areas, especially those visiting rural areas, farms, rice field, and irrigation areas. Children under 15 years of age seem to particularly susceptible to the infection. So, yung outbreak usually nag-occur siya during rainy seasons and in tropical regions. For the diagnosis, JE should be suspected in patients with evidence of a neurologic infection such as encephalitis, meningitis, acute flaccid paralysis, who has recently traveled to or resided in an endemic country in Asia or Western Pacific. The laboratory diagnosis of JE virus infection should be performed using a JE virus-specific IgM capture, ELISA, on SCF or serum. Next is the Plaque reduction neutralization test can be performed to confirm the presence of the JE virus-specific neutralizing antibodies and discriminate between cross-reacting antibodies from closely related flaviviruses. Yung mga closely related, ayan sila, dengue, West Nile viruses. Next, so the activities to control Japanese encephalitis is fogging, fogging in the JE affected villages, health education regarding seriousness of JE, cleanliness and control on pig population, cover exposed skin by wearing long-sleeved shirts, long pants and hats, use an appropriate insect repellent as directed, use a bed net if the area where you are sleeping exposed to outdoor. So for the prevention, so JEV don't have any antiviral drugs yet, but we have vaccines to prevent JEV. So we have 4. First is the live attenuated vaccine based on the SA14-14-2 strain of the JE virus. The varicella-derived, inactivated, and alum adjuvated JE vaccine based on SA14-14-2 strain. Varicella-derived inactivated JE vaccine, the mouse brain-derived vaccine. This is the only vaccine that is licensed to US. The other are licensed in Japan, China, and other countries. Then the live attenuated JE yellow fever chimeric vaccine. So for the programs, I didn't find any programs in locally and for the other countries because in Western countries it's not that a problem of JAV. So they only have less cases of JAV. So they only have the prevention activities na pwede gawin if ever to prevent the JAV, like yung fogging nga. But in the Philippines, I found some news about DOH conducting program or nag-held sila ng program sa Baguio. Tapos yung program yung tinatawag na 4S to combat Japanese encephalitis virus. Search and destroy mosquitoes breeding places. Self-protection measures. Seek early consultation for fever. Say yes to fogging when there is an impending outbreak. So I further research, but I couldn't find any programs. But I find some news what are actions on what the government do because of the increasing cases of the JEV. So the DOH set the launch of Japanese encephalitis vaccine in Pangasinan, and DOH rolls out JEV vaccine in CAR and in 3 other regions. So, and that would be all. But here's the last slide is for the summary of my report. So first, mosquito-borne. Japanese encephalitis is a mosquito-borne life-threatening viral disease causing swelling of the brain. It affects 30,000 to 50,000 people every year globally. It is the first clinical case was recorded in 1871 in Japan. Only 1 in 200 people infected with JE virus develop symptoms. Symptoms include fever, headache, neck stiffness, and convulsions. And it is diagnosed by blood tests and CSF or cerebrospinal fluid examination. Treatment involves supportive care. There is no antiviral therapy. JAV can be prevented by vaccination. Patients who survive develop lifelong immunity. Complications include deafness, paralysis, coma, and death. And that will be all. Thank you. So here's my references.